The dog didn't bark. He didn't cry. He just ran, through mud, rain and branches that tore at his sides, carrying a fox cub in his mouth as if it were made of glass. Blood streaked down his fur. His breathing was ragged, uneven, but his eyes, deep, amber, steady, never wavered. Whatever he was running from or toward, he refused to stop. When he reached the edge of the forest clearing, his legs buckled. The cub slipped from his jaws and hit the ground with a dull, heartbreaking thud. For a long second, nothing moved. The wind fell silent. Even the rain seemed to pause. A few meters away, crouched behind a moss-covered rock, a woman held her breath. She had been hiking for hours, following deer tracks for her wildlife project. But this scene didn't fit anything she had ever seen before. A German shepherd, mud-soaked, ribs showing, eyes raw with fatigue, and at his paws, a tiny red fox cub, motionless. He nudged it once, twice, then a third time, softer this time as if he already knew. The cub didn't respond. The woman, heart pounding, lifted her camera without thinking, but her hands shook too much to take a shot. She wasn't looking at an animal saving prey. She was looking at something that felt like grief. The dog turned his head sharply. His gaze caught hers, a flash of warning, but also confusion, pain. He growled low, not with anger, but desperation. "Stay back," it seemed to say. And then, impossibly, he picked the cub up again and kept walking. She followed, slowly, carefully, not daring to speak. The forest was thick with fog now. Branches creaked and water dripped from every leaf. Each time she lost sight of him, she felt panic rise, not for herself, but for him. He moved like someone retracing a memory, step by step, as if the path was written inside him. Every few meters he'd stop, adjust the cub gently in his mouth, and limp forward again. Finally, after what felt like an hour, he reached a hollow under an uprooted oak. A burrow half collapsed, the ground caved in by the storm. The smell hit her before the sight did. Damp earth, decay, fur. Inside, two more fox cubs, barely moving. Their tiny bodies pressed against each other for warmth. The dog lowered the lifeless cub beside them, then backed up, sitting down with a kind of defeated grace. His chest heaved, his ears flattened. He looked at the cubs, then at the forest, as if waiting for something or someone to return. The woman's throat tightened. She knelt a few steps away, whispering, "It's okay, boy. I'm not here to hurt you." No response. Only the rain. Then she noticed it, a flash of metal under the mud, a tag. She leaned in carefully, reading the engraving through the dirt, "Ranger." And beneath it, almost worn off, "Search and rescue, retired." Her breath caught. A retired rescue dog. And somehow he was still rescuing. The realization hit her like cold water. This wasn't instinct, this was duty, muscle memory, compassion, the kind that doesn't fade when the uniform is gone. "Ranger," she whispered again, softer. "You remember, don't you? You're trying to save them." Ranger's ears twitched. He leaned down, pressed his nose to the smallest cub, and let out a low, trembling sound. Not a bark, not a whine, something deeper, like the echo of every life he'd tried to save and couldn't. The woman bit her lip to keep from crying. She took off her jacket, scooped the cubs inside, and held them close to her chest. They were ice cold, fragile, one barely breathing. Ranger's eyes followed every movement, his body shaking from exhaustion. When she tried to step forward, he flinched, then slowly lowered his head and let her. That was the moment she understood. He wasn't protecting himself, he was asking for help. Thunder rolled in the distance. The light faded. The rain turned from a drizzle to a downpour. And in that half-light, a woman, a broken dog, and 3 dying cubs, something unspoken passed between them. Trust. But what neither of them knew was that this storm wasn't done yet. And before the night was over, one of them would be forced to choose who to save first. The rain became a wall. Sheets of water poured down, turning the clearing into a pool of mud and roots. The woman pulled her jacket tighter around the cubs, clutching them close, feeling the faint, uneven pulse against her chest. Ranger stood beside her, soaked, trembling, but alert. His eyes stayed fixed on the burrow, as if he could still hear something under the soil. "We need to move," she whispered. "They won't survive this cold." She took one cautious step toward him, then another. Ranger didn't growl this time. He just limped forward, standing between her and the fallen tree, staring toward the dark trail ahead. It felt like he was saying, "Follow me." She did. They moved slowly through the woods, her arms wrapped around the cubs, Ranger leading with unsteady steps. The storm raged harder, lightning cutting through the trees, thunder rolling like something alive. Every few meters he'd stop, sniff the air, and look back at her. His back leg dragged slightly, leaving a faint trail in the mud. "But you're hurt," she said softly. "Hey, it's okay, we'll find shelter." The forest path narrowed, then opened into a small hunting shed, half collapsed, roof hanging low, but standing. She pushed the door open with her shoulder and stumbled inside. The smell of damp wood hit her. The air was cold, but at least dry. Ranger followed, circling once before collapsing onto the floor. His chest rose and fell sharply, his breath wheezing. The woman knelt beside him, laying the fox cubs on a pile of old sacks. The smallest one whimpered, weak but alive. She smiled through tears. "Hang on, little one, hang on." Ranger's eyes stayed fixed on her. There was pain there, yes, but also something else. The same quiet determination she'd seen in the forest. The same look she'd seen in dogs that refused to give up, even after the search was over. She unzipped her backpack, pulling out a small first aid kit, standard gear for her field work. She tore a strip of gauze, wrapped it around Ranger's bleeding paw. He didn't flinch. He just watched her, eyes glinting in the dim light. "Who left you out here?" she asked under her breath. "Who lets a dog like you go?" Ranger blinked slowly, then turned his head toward the cubs. The smallest one gave a faint, raspy cry. She followed his gaze and noticed something. The cub's chest rose unevenly, a strange sound in its lungs. Pneumonia, or something close to it. "Oh no," she whispered. She dug into her bag again, found an emergency blanket, and wrapped all 3 cubs tightly. She needed warmth, a car, a clinic, anything. Her phone, dead. No signal this deep in the forest. She sat back, frustrated, heart pounding in her throat. "We have to get out." Ranger stood, limping to the door. He pressed his nose against the wood, sniffed, then looked back at her. That same look again, urgent, focused. She hesitated. "What is it?" He nudged the door again. A low bark this time, short, deliberate. Then he turned and started out into the storm. She didn't want to follow, not with the cubs, not in that weather. But something inside her, the same instinct that drove her into this forest in the first place, told her to trust him. She wrapped the cubs in her jacket, held them tight, and followed Ranger into the dark. The path was barely visible now, washed away by rain. The wind howled through the trees, tearing at branches. Twice she almost slipped, and each time Ranger stopped, waited, turned back to check she was still there. They climbed a small ridge, the ground slippery beneath them. When they reached the top, she saw it, faint light in the distance. A cabin, her breath caught. Maybe an old ranger station, maybe someone lived there. Ranger barked once, weak but clear. Then he looked back at her, tail twitching faintly, before moving faster toward the light. She almost cried in relief. "Good boy, keep going." They reached the cabin door. It was locked, the handle rusted. She banged on it, shouting for help. Nothing. She tried again. Still silence. Then, from behind her, Ranger growled, low and sharp. His fur bristled. She turned. The forest behind them seemed to shift. Something moved, dark, low, silent. Her heart stopped. A shape, then another, eyes glowing in the dark. Foxes, adults. 2 of them, wet, thin, cautious. They froze at the sight of her. Ranger stood between them, head low, tail down, no aggression, just stillness. One of the foxes sniffed the air, then stepped forward toward the bundle in her arms. The woman didn't move. The cubs stirred under the jacket, letting out small, fragile sounds. Recognition. The adult fox gave a sharp, almost human cry. The other joined in, circling closer. The woman felt tears rise again. She lowered herself to the ground, unwrapping the jacket just enough for them to see. The adults sniffed the cubs frantically, licking, whining, desperate. Ranger stayed completely still, watching. No tension, no dominance, only calm. It hit her like lightning. He had brought her here for them, not for help, not for himself, for the cubs' family. The adults tried to lift the smallest one, but it was too weak. The woman leaned in, whispering, "Let me help." Carefully, she set the cubs near the tree line. The foxes hovered, unsure, until Ranger stepped back. Just one step. That was all it took. The adults took their cubs into the undergrowth, one by one, disappearing into the shadows. The woman stood there, soaked, trembling, heart torn between relief and awe. She looked down at Ranger. He was watching the darkness where the foxes had gone, silent, eyes glassy with something that looked like peace. She knelt beside him, pressing her hand to his fur. "You did it," she whispered. "You saved them." He exhaled, long and slow, his body sagging against her side. "Hey, stay with me, okay? We're going home." But when she looked up again, her breath froze. In the distance, headlights. Someone was coming. The headlights cut through the rain like two sharp knives. The woman blinked against the glare, her pulse racing. A truck stopped a few meters away, tires sinking into the mud. A man jumped out, flashlight in hand, shouting over the storm. "You're out of your mind being out here." She raised a trembling arm. "Please, I need help. There's a dog. He's hurt." The man ran closer, squinting. He looked to be in his 50s, heavy coat, sheriff's badge barely visible under the rain. When his flashlight hit Ranger, he froze. "Wait, where did you find him?" The woman frowned, still catching her breath. "Down in the ravine. He was carrying fox cubs. He led me here." The man's face changed. The anger, the urgency, all gone. In its place, disbelief. "Fox cubs?" he repeated quietly. "Good God." He crouched beside Ranger, shining the light over his fur, then toward the old collar. When he read the name, his voice cracked. "Ranger, you're still out here?" The woman hesitated. "You know him?" The man nodded slowly. "Everyone around here does." They got Ranger into the truck, wrapped in a blanket. The woman sat in the back seat, holding him against her leg as the sheriff drove through winding forest roads. The rain pounded the windshield. The cubs were gone now, safely with their parents. But something about leaving that clearing felt wrong, unfinished. The man spoke softly as they drove. 2 years ago, Ranger belonged to a firefighter named Mason Boyd. They worked rescue, floods, missing hikers, even avalanche drills. Best pair we ever had. The woman turned toward him. "What happened?" He took a breath. "Flash flood down by the river. Mason went under trying to save a kid. Ranger pulled the boy out. He waited by the riverbank for hours, but Mason never surfaced." Her hand covered her mouth. "He watched his partner drown." The sheriff nodded. "After that, he wouldn't leave the area. Every time we tried to bring him in, he ran back into the forest, like he was still on duty." The woman looked down at the dog beside her, the muddy fur, the faint scars along his chest. And suddenly the image of him carrying that tiny fox cub hit differently. It wasn't random. It wasn't instinct. He'd seen something small, helpless, and his training had taken over. He was still trying to save what he'd once lost. The sheriff's voice softened. "You said he brought you to the cubs?" She nodded. "He found the burrow after the storm. He carried one in his mouth. He wouldn't let it go." The man's eyes glistened. "That's Ranger, all right. Always brings them back, no matter how far gone." They reached the small-town animal clinic near midnight. The lights flickered as they pushed through the door. The vet, a woman in her 40s, gasped when she saw the dog. "Ranger, my God, I thought he was dead." They lifted him onto a table. His breathing was shallow, paws raw, ribs showing through his skin. The vet injected fluids, checked his lungs, murmured under her breath. The woman who'd found him stood nearby, soaked to the bone, her heart pounding with a kind of helpless fear she hadn't felt in years. She whispered, "He's going to make it, right?" The vet didn't answer right away. She pressed a stethoscope against Ranger's chest, frowned, then forced a smile. "He's a fighter. He's always been." The sheriff leaned against the wall, rubbing his eyes. You know, after Mason died, that dog searched the riverbank for weeks. We'd find him sitting where the body was recovered. Every night. Didn't matter how cold it got. The woman swallowed hard. He never stopped looking. No, the sheriff said. He never does. Hours passed. The storm faded to drizzle. The woman sat by Ranger's side, fingers buried in his damp fur. The vet had gone to rest in the back room. The clinic smelled faintly of antiseptic and rain. She watched his chest rise and fall, slow and labored. Every now and then his paw twitched, maybe dreaming, maybe remembering. She whispered, "You couldn't save him, could you?" Ranger's eyes fluttered open, just barely. Her throat tightened. "But you saved them. The cubs. You did what you were trained to do. What you wanted to do." He blinked once. Just once. And for a moment, she could have sworn he understood. At dawn, the storm broke. Pale light spilled through the window, catching on the metal of his old tag. She picked it up gently, running her thumb over the engraving. Search and rescue. Retired. Retired. But he'd never stopped working. When the sheriff came back with coffee, she looked up at him, voice low. He shouldn't be alone anymore. He still has that instinct, that heart. The man sighed. We've tried finding him a home. He always runs off. She hesitated. Maybe he just hasn't found the right person yet. The sheriff studied her face, the mud, the exhaustion, the quiet ache behind her eyes, and smiled faintly. Maybe he has now. By the time the vet returned, Ranger had stabilized enough to lift his head. The woman reached out, hand trembling, and he leaned into her touch. That single gesture, the quiet trust of it, made her chest ache. She had lost her brother 3 years earlier, in an accident. The same helplessness, the same silence, had haunted her since. Watching Ranger fight for that tiny life in the rain had cracked something open, the part of her that had stopped believing in rescue, in hope, in second chances. She whispered, "You were never lost, were you? You just didn't know where to bring what you were still carrying." Ranger's breathing slowed. He pressed his head against her palm, eyes closing again. Outside, the first light of morning stretched across the wet fields. Birds started to sing. But before the peace could settle, the vet frowned suddenly, checking the monitor again. The beeping faltered. Ranger's heart skipped. Once, twice. The woman's pulse spiked. "What's happening?" The vet moved quickly, adjusting the oxygen mask. "He's fading. His body's shutting down." The woman grabbed his paw, whispering, "No, no, no, stay with me, boy. Please, stay with me." The vet shouted, "Come on, Ranger. Not yet." The sheriff stood frozen, hat in his hands. Then, just for a second, Ranger's eyes opened again. He looked at the woman, calm, clear, and his paw twitched weakly against hers. He wasn't fighting anymore. He was waiting. The clinic had gone quiet. The only sound was the rain easing off the roof, soft, rhythmic, like breathing. The woman kept her hand on Ranger's paw, feeling the faint throb beneath his skin. The monitor beeped unevenly, slow, fragile, like a clock running out of time. The vet whispered, "His heart's giving out. There's not much else we can do." But the woman shook her head. "No, not after all that. He didn't come this far to die alone." The sheriff stepped forward, but she didn't look up. She just kept her eyes on Ranger, her voice low, steady. "You carried that little fox through the storm. You fought until you couldn't walk. You don't quit, remember?" Ranger's breathing hitched. His ears twitched faintly at the sound of her voice. She leaned closer, her words trembling. "You saved them. Now let me save you." The vet adjusted the oxygen tube. "He's not fighting anymore. He's tired." The woman closed her eyes. So was I, she thought, until tonight. Then something changed. A sound. Faint scratching at the door. Once, then again. The sheriff turned. "What?" The vet went to open it, and in the doorway stood 2 red foxes, drenched, eyes wide in the light. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The smaller of the 2 stepped forward, paws leaving tiny prints on the tiled floor. In her mouth a piece of fur, soft grey, unmistakably dog. The vet whispered, "They came back." The woman's chest tightened. They're looking for him. The fox laid the tuft gently at the edge of Ranger's blanket, then backed away, head low. The other fox lingered in the doorway, watching. Ranger stirred, his head lifted weakly, eyes finding them. His body trembled, but his gaze cleared, alert, focused, alive. The smallest fox made a low, throaty sound, a cry, or maybe a thank you. And for the first time in hours, Ranger tried to stand. The vet reached out instinctively. No, he shouldn't, but the woman stopped her. Let him. Ranger pushed against the floor, legs shaking, breath shallow. Slowly, painfully, he rose, just enough to meet the foxes at eye level. His nose touched the tuft of fur they'd brought, and he exhaled softly, almost a sigh. Then he looked at the woman. Just one look. It was the kind of look that said everything words couldn't. You're safe now. They're safe. It's enough. He sank back down, his head resting against her knee. The foxes stayed a few seconds longer, then disappeared into the fading rain, silent as ghosts. The monitor beeped slower now, steady but thin. The vet wiped her eyes without a word. The sheriff stood by the window, staring at the pale sky. He said quietly, "Mason used to tell me something about him. Said Ranger never needed orders. He just knew when someone was lost." The woman smiled faintly, her hand still resting on his fur. "He still does." The vet whispered, "He might not make it through the night." The woman nodded. "Then I'll stay." Hours passed. The storm broke completely. The world outside the clinic glowed faintly blue, dawn creeping through the trees. The woman hadn't moved. She sat on the floor beside Ranger's bed, her back against the wall, his head in her lap. Every so often she'd whisper something, not to keep him awake, but to keep herself from breaking. "You did everything you could, didn't you? Maybe that's all any of us can do." At some point she must have drifted into a light sleep, because when she opened her eyes again, the room was washed in sunrise. The first thing she noticed was silence. The monitor was off. For a moment she didn't move. She just stared at him, still, peaceful, his fur catching the light like gold. Her throat closed. "Oh, Ranger!" But then, she noticed something. His collar, the tag she'd cleaned the night before. It glinted under the sunlight, and beside it, pressed against her jacket, a single fox paw print. Muddy, small, fresh. Her breath caught. She looked toward the open window. The forest beyond shimmered in morning mist. The foxes had come back again. Maybe they'd sat by him one last time. Maybe they'd just waited, the way he once had. When the sheriff returned later, she was still there, sitting quietly, eyes dry now, one hand resting on the old dog's chest. He didn't say a word. He just took off his hat and stood beside her. Finally, she whispered, "He didn't die rescuing anyone. He died knowing he'd finished his last mission." The sheriff nodded. Maybe that's how heroes go. Not in the noise, but in the quiet. She smiled faintly. "He wasn't just saving those cubs." The man looked at her. "What do you mean?" She looked down at Ranger, brushing her fingers over his collar. "He saved me too, I just didn't know I needed it." Weeks later, she returned to the forest. The river had calmed. The oak that sheltered the fox den still leaned low, roots twisting like arms. She placed a small wooden marker beneath it, nothing fancy, just a flat stone with a name carved by hand. Ranger. He never stopped searching. For a moment, she thought she saw movement in the trees, a flash of red fur, a curious face watching from the shadows. She smiled through tears. "He'd like to know you're okay," she whispered. A breeze passed through the branches, soft and warm. And maybe it was just the wind, or maybe not, but she could swear she heard it then. A faint bark, far off, fading into the woods. That night, she didn't just say goodbye to a dog. She said goodbye to the part of herself that thought compassion had limits. And somewhere out there, beyond the trees and the rain and the silence, a rescued heart finally rested. That night, she didn't just save a dog. She saved the last piece of her heart that still believed in kindness.